Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we are going on a journey through the surprisingly wild history of how we've tried to teach and learn languages. It's a fantastic story of old-school rules, huge rebellions, and some, let's just say, very creative experiments, all to solve that puzzle of going from hello to truly fluent.
Have you ever been there? Drowning in verb conjugations and vocabulary flashcards, feeling like you're not actually getting any closer to having a real conversation? Well, if you felt that frustration, you're in good company. Because for a very, very long time, that was pretty much the only way. So how did we break free from that?
Here's the game plan. We're going to travel through 5 major eras in language teaching. We'll start way back in the grammar translation era. Then we'll see the first big push towards actually speaking. We'll see how World War II completely changed the game, dive into the groovy designer methods of the 70s, and land right here, in the present, with what's called the communicative approach.
All right, let's set the time machine to the 19th century. Our story kicks off with a method that basically treated learning French or German the same way you'd study an ancient, dead language, like Latin.
It was called the grammar translation method. And you have to understand, the whole point wasn't to order a croissant in Paris. Not at all. The goal was to be able to read classic literature, Goethe, Victor Hugo, and to give your brain a good workout through super rigorous grammar drills and translation exercises.
So what did this actually look like? Well, picture this. Your teacher is lecturing in your own language, not the one you're trying to learn. You're memorizing these long lists of words completely out of context. And you spend hours, hours, translating totally random sentences. Speaking? Pronunciation? Nope, not on the agenda. You could become an absolute master of German grammar and still not be able to ask where the bathroom is in Berlin.
Yeah, it probably won't surprise you to hear that people started thinking, maybe this isn't the best way to learn how to, talk to people. And that dissatisfaction sparked the first big rebellion against the old guard.
The perfect example of this is a guy named François Gouin. He was a French teacher, and he decided to learn German using the traditional method. He went all in, moved to Germany, memorized the entire grammar book, crammed hundreds of verbs into his brain. And at the end of it all, nothing. He couldn't understand a thing, he couldn't speak, it was a total bust.
So he goes home, completely defeated, and then he has this amazing aha moment. He's watching his little nephew play, and he sees the kid isn't learning abstract rules. He's learning by connecting words to actions in a sequence, like, I see the ball, I run to the ball, I kick the ball. He realized we learn language through real-world context, not by memorizing rules in a vacuum. And that observation, it changed everything.
This huge shift gave birth to something called the direct method. And as you can see here, it was the polar opposite of grammar translation. In the direct method classroom, your native language was forbidden. Translation was out. The whole focus was on listening and speaking using everyday vocabulary. It was a revolution.
Now, the direct method was a huge step in the right direction, but then progress kind of stalled for a bit. And it actually took a massive global crisis to force the next major leap forward in language teaching.
You see, in 1929, this report came out in the US that actually pushed schools back towards the old reading-focused methods. But then, World War II exploded onto the scene, and all of a sudden there was this urgent, desperate need for people, soldiers, spies, diplomats, who could actually speak and understand other languages, fast. This wasn't an academic exercise anymore, it was a strategic necessity, leading the military to pour money into a brand new program.
This intensive army method eventually morphed into what we call the audiolingual method. Now, its big idea, borrowed from psychology at the time, was that language isn't about deep thinking or understanding rules, it's about forming habits. It's muscle memory for your mouth. You just listen, repeat, and drill until the right words come out automatically.
So, the audiolingual classroom was all about mimicry. You'd listen to a dialogue on a tape recorder and repeat it over and over and over. You'd do pattern drills like, here's the book, where is the book, there is the book. The goal was perfect, error-free sentences. Make a mistake, and the teacher corrects you instantly. Sound a little familiar? Yeah, if you've ever used a modern language app, you have definitely seen the ghost of audiolingualism.
But you know how these things go. The pendulum always swings back. By the 1960s and 70s, people were getting tired of that rigid drill sergeant approach. This led to a burst of creativity, a whole wave of new methods that put the human learner, with all their feelings and anxieties, right at the center of the universe.
This was the great era of the designer methods. They were all pretty different, and some were kinda out there.
But they were all built on this one core belief, that the biggest barrier to learning a language is fear, stress, anxiety. And if you can lower that stress, you can unlock the brain's natural ability to learn. Let's look at a few of the most famous.
First up, community language learning. Seriously, picture a group therapy session. Students sit in a circle. The teacher is more of a counselor. You say what you want to say in your own language, the counselor translates it for you, and you repeat it to the group. The whole point was to create a safe, supportive community where you weren't afraid to try.
Then there was Suggestopedia, which was all about creating a vibe of like infant-like relaxation. We're talking comfy armchairs, dim lighting, classical music playing softly in the background. The theory was that if you could get learners into this super relaxed, suggestive state, their brains would just soak up the new language effortlessly.
Next, the silent way, which totally flips the script on what a teacher does. The teacher is silent, almost the whole time. Instead, they use these little colored rods and wall charts to get students to talk and to figure out the patterns of the language for themselves. It's all about student discovery, not teacher-led instruction.
We also got Total Physical Response, or TPR. This one is super intuitive. It's based on how little kids learn their first language. The teacher gives simple commands, like stand up, walk to the window, touch the door, and the students just do it. They respond with their bodies, not with words, linking language directly to physical action.
And finally, we get to the really influential natural approach. The core idea here is that you don't really learn a language through conscious study. You acquire it naturally by understanding messages. So the teacher's main job is just to provide tons of what's called comprehensible input, language that you can mostly understand even if you don't know every single word, all in a low-stress, fun environment.
Okay, so after that whirlwind tour through all those different philosophies, from strict grammarians to silent teachers, where did we finally land? Well, the modern classroom is really dominated by an approach that tries to take the best ideas from everything that came before it.
And that brings us to communicative language teaching, or CLT. Now, CLT isn't one single rigid method with a rulebook. It's more of an approach, a philosophy. It says that the whole point of language is to communicate. Simple, right? So the goal in the classroom should be to get students actually communicating, interacting, and doing things with the language from day one.
This chart just perfectly sums up the whole journey. We've gone from a goal of reading old books to a goal of communicating effectively, right here and now. The teacher has shifted from being the all-knowing authority to being a facilitator, a guide. And maybe the biggest change of all, the student has gone from being a passive bucket for rules to being an active participant, someone who negotiates meaning. We've moved from a focus on perfect grammar to a focus on just getting your message across.
So from dusty grammar rules to classrooms filled with music, the way we think about learning languages has changed so profoundly. But the evolution is far from over. Which leaves us with a final question to think about. What comes next? Is the next revolution going to be AI-powered tutors, fully immersive virtual reality worlds, or something else we can't even begin to imagine? The story, for sure, is still being written.